Iris Penhallow had been sitting on the edge of the bridal bed for 11 minutes when she heard his footsteps in the corridor. She had counted the minutes by the candle on the nightstand, watching the wax pool and run, and she had arranged herself the way her mother had shown her. Shoulders squared, hands flat on the coverlet, chin level. The nightdress her mother's modiste had made was heavy white cotton with a high neck and long sleeves, and it was warm enough that Iris should not have been cold, and yet she was. The fire in the grate at Thornemere Abbey threw good heat, and the room smelled of beeswax and old stone and something faintly floral she could not name. And she sat in all of it, with her hands flat on the coverlet, and her mother's 6 months of whispered instruction held in her body like a locked door. She was 19 years old. She had met Rowan Castellane, Duke of Thornemere, twice before today. The footsteps stopped outside the door. She drew one breath, squared her shoulders a fraction further, and fixed her eyes on the middle distance. Rowan entered in shirt sleeves and waistcoat. He had removed his coat, his cravat, his gloves, and he crossed 2 steps into the room and stopped. He did not move toward the bed. He stood in the doorway shadow and looked at her. And what he saw made him go very still in a way that had nothing to do with hesitation and everything to do with the kind of attention a careful man pays to something that requires care. He did not speak immediately. He crossed to the fireplace, not to the bed, and he lowered himself to one knee on the hearthrug 3 feet from where she sat. Not kneeling before her, as though in ceremony, but kneeling the way a man kneels to speak to a child who is frightened, to bring his face level with hers rather than standing over her. He set a small book on the hearthrug beside him. Iris registered the spine. Cowper's letters. He produced a clean handkerchief from his waistcoat pocket and held it toward her. She could not raise her hand to take it. She tried, and her hand did not move, and she looked at the handkerchief and then at the floor, and a single tear ran down the side of her face. She had not intended it, had not felt it coming, and she heard her mother's voice say, in the locked room inside her, "Don't cry." Rowan looked at the tear. Then he raised his right thumb, slowly, letting her watch the movement so that nothing arrived without her seeing it first. And he reached across the 3 feet of hearthrug and dried the tear from her cheek with the side of his thumb. His hand drew back. He did not comment on the tear. He did not comment on her hands, which were still flat on the coverlet, or on the nightdress, or on the locked quality of her posture. "We will wait," he said. "There is no arrangement here that requires tonight." Iris said nothing. He did not appear to need her to. He opened the book of Cowper's letters, settled himself more comfortably on the hearthrug, which suggested he had thought about this, had considered the possibility of the hearthrug, and began to read aloud. His voice was low and even, and carried a dry undercurrent that was not quite warmth and not quite humor, but something between the two. He read until the clock on the mantelpiece showed midnight, by which time 2 of the candles had gone out, and Iris had, without precisely deciding to, shifted her weight back from the edge of the bed onto the coverlet itself, her hands no longer flat, but folded in her lap. When the clock struck midnight, Rowan closed the book, rose from the hearthrug, and told her he would sleep in the dressing room, and that Mrs. Halston would know where to find him if Iris needed anything in the night. "Good night, Your Grace," Iris said. It was the first thing she had said to him since the church. "Good night," he said. And that was all. And he went through to the dressing room and closed the door. In the morning, Mrs. Halston, the housekeeper, moved the razor from the nightstand to the dressing room without being asked, and the household arranged itself quietly around what had not happened. the way a well-run household always arranges itself around the things its people require and need not be told. Over the first 3 weeks, Iris watched her husband the way her watercolor training had taught her to watch anything, without moving her eyes too quickly, recording what was actually there rather than what she had expected to find. She had expected something. Her mother's instruction had prepared her for something specific, and the specificity of it had given her a shape to brace against. But Rowan did not take that shape, and so she watched him instead. She noted that he did not raise his voice to servants, not once, not in 3 weeks, not when the boot boy dropped a tray on the front steps, and not when the kitchen sent up a dinner that was overcooked in 3 of its 4 removes. He moved slowly through rooms, with the particular deliberateness of a man who is aware he is large in them and does not wish to diminish the space for other people. He asked questions at dinner rather than delivering opinions. On the 4th evening, he asked Iris whether she had found the East Wing library or only the West Wing one. And when she said she had not known there were 2, he looked briefly pleased, not at her ignorance, but at the prospect of showing her, and then said, "The East Wing one is considerably better, though it takes 3 wrong turns and a moment of genuine self-doubt to reach it." She had not smiled, but she had looked at him. He had not once entered her bedroom uninvited. He knocked. He announced himself. He waited for her response before he opened the door, and when the response took longer than it should have, she was sometimes slow to answer, not from reluctance, but from the strangeness of being answered for. He waited without impatience and without comment. In the 2nd week, a letter arrived from London, addressed to Sir Thomas Penhallow, and forwarded on to Thornemere. It reached the estate office, and Rowan read it there, and then locked it in the lower drawer of his desk. He told no one. Iris did not know it existed. In the 3rd week, at dinner on a Thursday evening, Rowan made a remark about the floor plan of Thornmere's East Corridor. Specifically that it had been designed by an architect who believed that inconvenience builds character, and that the East Corridor was, in consequence, an exercise in moral improvement. He delivered this observation with a perfectly level face, and then laughed at himself before the punchline had fully landed. A short, genuine laugh, unperformed. The laugh of a man who finds his own material approximately as amusing as it deserves to be. Iris heard the laugh and felt something shift. Not dramatically, not with any sensation she could have described to her mother, but something that had been braced, some arrangement of her interior that had been held at a particular angle since the wedding. Moved a fraction, the way a door moves when the latch is not quite caught and someone walks past it in the corridor. She had no name for it yet, but she noted it, the way she noted everything about him, in the careful visual record she had been keeping since the morning after the wedding night. In the 4th week of their marriage, Iris asked to learn to ride. She asked at breakfast, directly, without preamble. She had been considering it for several days, and had decided that the best way to ask a direct question was to ask it directly. Rowan looked up from his correspondence and said that he would take her to the stable yard himself that morning if the weather held, and the weather held. He lifted her to the saddle with both hands at her waist, 4 seconds, practical, his grip adjusting once to correct her balance, and then stepped back and led the lesson without ceremony. He told her where to put her hands and how to distribute her weight and what the horse would feel through her seat before she felt it herself. And he spoke to her the way he spoke to everyone, as though she were a person capable of understanding what he was saying. On the 2nd lesson, 4 days later, she slipped dismounting, She came down off the wrong side of the movement, and Rowan was there, both arms fully catching her before she reached the ground. And she was held for 4 seconds in the circle of his arms before he set her carefully down on solid ground and stepped back. She laughed. It came out of her completely without permission. A short, genuine sound, and she was surprised by it. Surprised by its existence, and surprised by the fact that it felt like relief rather than embarrassment. Rowan was watching her with an expression she could not quite categorize. "I should like to try that again," she said. "The dismount," he said. She nodded. "Yes," she said. She fell into his arms twice more before the lesson ended. Each time he caught her, and each time he set her down on solid ground, and each time he returned to correcting her position without remarking on the pattern, without the knowing look she had half expected, without the particular smile that would have made her feel foolish. He simply taught her, and caught her when she fell, and taught her again. Walking back toward the house with the stable yard behind them and the late afternoon light coming flat across the Northumberland hills, Iris was aware that something had shifted between them that she did not yet have the language for. Not the catching, not the 4 seconds in his arms. Something quieter than that. Something in the way he had not remarked on the pattern had simply continued to teach her, as though her falling into his arms were a fact of the lesson rather than an event requiring commentary. She did not have the language for it, but she noted it, and she carried it with her back into the house. In the 5th week, a letter from Lady Sybil Penhallow arrived at Thornmere addressed to Iris. Iris opened it at the breakfast table and read it through once, quickly, and then read it through again, more slowly. Her mother had written in careful language, the kind of language that said one thing plainly while meaning another thing that could not be said plainly, asking whether her husband was being patient with your particular difficulties. Iris set the letter down flat on the table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she slid it across the table to Rowan without a word and watched him read it. Rowan read it. His expression did not change in any way she could identify. But he set the letter down with a particular kind of deliberateness that told her he had understood both the plain thing and the other thing. "I should like to write a reply," Iris said. "Of course," Rowan said. "Here," she said. "Now, with you at the desk." He looked at her. "If you prefer," he said. They moved to the writing desk in the morning room, and Iris sat with a clean sheet of paper and her pen, and Rowan sat across from her, and she wrote. She wrote that she was well, and that Thornmere was larger than she had anticipated, and that the East Wing Library was, as she had been told, considerably better than the West Wing one. She wrote that her husband had no particular expectations she had not chosen to grant, and that she was learning to ride, and that the hills in Northumberland were unlike anything Devon had prepared her for. She read the draft aloud before sealing it. She did not ask Rowan's permission before reading it. She read it the way a person reads a document they have authored and intends to stand behind, steadily, without apology, looking up once at the end to meet his eyes. "It says what I mean," she said. "It does," Rowan said. She sealed it. She did not ask whether he approved. That same week, Sir Thomas Penhallow arrived at Thornmere unannounced. Iris heard the carriage on the forecourt and recognized it before she saw it. She knew the sound of her father's horses, the particular rhythm of that coachman's driving. She was in the upstairs corridor when Sir Thomas's voice reached her from below, and she stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, and then did not go down. She heard her father's voice moving toward the estate office, and then the estate office door closing, and then nothing. What she heard through the closed door of the corridor outside the estate office was not the words. The walls at Thornemere were thick. What she heard was the tone, her father's voice climbing in the way it climbed when he wanted something and believed he was owed it, rising and pressing. And then Rowan's voice underneath it, level and then quieter. The quietness that is not retreat, but its opposite. The quietness of a man who has decided that he will not be moved. The carriage left the forecourt 40 minutes later. Iris watched from the upstairs corridor window. She found Rowan in the estate office. He was sitting at his desk with his hands flat on the surface and his head bowed, and he was carrying something. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the particular stillness of his hands. Something she had no context for yet, no map of, but which she recognized as weight. She crossed the room. She sat on the corner of the desk beside him, and she placed her right hand over his left. She left it there. She did not speak. He did not move for a moment, and then he turned his hand under hers, slowly, the way he always moved, letting her see the movement, and brought his palm up to meet her palm, and she laced her fingers through his. It was the first deliberate skin-to-skin contact between them, and it had been initiated entirely by her and her mother's doctrine, which had been cracking since the 3rd week, since the laugh at the dinner table, since the 4 seconds in the stable yard. Broke in that gesture without either of them speaking a word. In the 6th week, Lord Gervase Ashbury, Baron Ashbury of Kent, filed a bill in Chancery. In the 7th week, the summons arrived at Thornemere at 4 in the afternoon, delivered by a London courier who handed it to the footman and was gone before anyone thought to ask him anything. Rowan received it in the estate office, read it standing, and then put it in his coat pocket and went to find Iris. That evening he brought her to the library, the East Wing Library, which she had learned to reach by now without the self-doubt, and he laid every document on the long table in order, working from left to right with the methodical patience of a man who has been carrying these papers in his mind for 3 years and is setting them down for the first time. Ashbury's original contract with Sir Thomas Penhallow, dated 3 years ago, when Iris was 16. The buyout agreement, dated 19 months ago, when Iris was 17, signed by Rowan and his solicitor. His grandfather's ledger, the original, with the entries showing the fraudulent debt, £12,000 that had never existed, compounded across 2 generations into Sir Thomas's ruin, 19 months of restitution correspondence, letters to and from London solicitors, copies of transfer documents, records of every legal mechanism Rowan had examined and either used or discarded, and at the right end of the table, the Chancery summons, delivered at 4 in the afternoon. "Read them," Rowan said. He moved to the window. He stood with his back partly turned, looking out at the dark garden. Iris read. She read for 40 minutes, in order from left to right, without speaking. She read Ashbury's contract, the price Sir Thomas had accepted for her at 16, the terms of what had been purchased. And she read Rowan's buyout agreement, and she read the grandfather's ledger with its careful fraudulent entries, and she read the letters, 19 months of them, and she read the summons last. When she finished, she set the summons down flat on the table and looked at the window where Rowan was standing. "When did you find the ledger?" she asked. Rowan turned from the window. 3 years ago, he said. There was a walled-up room in the north wing. My father knew about it. He did nothing. How much did Ashbury pay for me? Iris asked. £800, Rowan said. Paid in 3 installments. She looked at the table. Then she looked back at him. Does my father know the original debt was fraudulent? No, Rowan said. Iris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he will not be told. Not by you, not by your solicitor, not through any legal proceeding. I will decide what my father is told and when. That is the first condition. Agreed, Rowan said, without qualification. The second condition, Iris said, is that I meet with your solicitor beginning tomorrow. Not to be briefed, to work. I will read every document he has, and I will know my own history before anyone attempts to use it against me in a court of law. I will send word to Oakes tonight, Rowan said. Iris nodded. She looked at the documents spread across the table, her history, arranged in order from left to right, available to her for the first time. She was angry. She felt it precisely, without confusion. Angry at Ashbury, who had bought her like livestock, and angry at her father, who had sold her twice, and angry at Rowan's grandfather, whose theft had made all of it possible, and angry, in a quieter register, at the arrangement itself? At the fact that so many men had arranged her consent out of existence before she had ever been asked for it. She was not angry at Rowan. She had read 19 months of letters. She knew what 19 months of letters meant. You told me tonight, she said. Not slowly, not in pieces. You told me everything at once and let me read it myself. Yes, Rowan said. That matters, Iris said. I want you to know it matters. He looked at her across the length of the table, across the documents spread between them. He said nothing. But he did not look away. Across January and February, Iris met 4 times with Mr. Caldwell Oakes in his chambers at Lincoln's Inn, a spare, precise man of 58, who wore the same gray coat to every meeting and asked questions with the relentless, unsympathetic patience of a man who has spent 30 years preparing people for rooms where sympathy is inadmissible. At the first meeting, he gave her the Chancery Bill to read and watched her read it. At the second, he asked her questions about the sequence of events from her perspective. Her father's announcement of the first betrothal, her understanding of the second, her knowledge of Ashbury. And he wrote down her answers in a small notebook with a particular expression that was not approval, but was its functional equivalent. You will be asked, Oakes said at the third meeting, whether you understood, at the time of your marriage to His Grace, that you were consenting freely and without duress. I understood that my father had arranged the marriage, Iris said. I did not know about Ashbury. I did not know about the fraudulent debt. Ashbury's counsel will argue, Oakes said, that the absence of that knowledge constitutes a defect in your consent. Then I will tell the court, Iris said, what I knew and what I did not know, and what I have learned since, and what I have concluded from all of it. I will tell them precisely and in order. Oakes looked at her over his notebook. Yes, he said. I believe you will. In the 10th week, Ashbury's counsel filed a submission to the court claiming that Iris had been of unsound mind at the time of her second consent. That a young woman of 19, raised in Devon, without access to London legal counsel, could not have comprehended what she was agreeing to. Rowan's solicitor produced 3 letters in response. Letters Iris had written to her mother across the first 6 weeks of her marriage. Clear and dated and legally precise in their account of her circumstances and her understanding of them. The submission failed before it reached argument. The night before the Chancery hearing, Iris and Rowan sat together in the East Wing library, with her testimony notes between them on the table. The fire was low. Outside, February pressed against the windows. I want to tell you something, Iris said. Rowan looked at her. I have been thinking about how to say it for some time, she said. And I have decided that the best way to say a direct thing is to say it directly. I know you have decided that, Rowan said. The dry undercurrent was in his voice, the thing that was between warmth and humor. I have chosen you, Iris said. Not the arrangement, not the legal mechanism that produced the arrangement, not the fact that you were preferable to Ashbury, which is a very low standard and not what I mean. I mean you, the man who read Cowper's letters to me on the hearthrug and taught me to ride and laid every document on this table and let me read them myself, and has been waiting for 7 months for me to decide what I want. I have decided. I chose you 3 weeks ago, and I am telling you now because tomorrow I intend to walk into a courtroom and say so in public. And I thought you should hear it from me first. Rowan said her name. He said it once, Iris, and then he could not speak further. And she watched something move across his face that he did not attempt to conceal or contain. She did not ask him to speak. She gathered her testimony notes from the table, told him she intended to sleep, and went upstairs. The Lincoln's Inn Chancery Chamber was full when they arrived. Iris had not expected the gallery, had known, in an abstract way, that Chancery hearings were public, but had not translated that knowledge into the specific physical reality of a packed room, the smell of wool coats and candle smoke, the creak of the benches under the weight of the assembled. She walked to her seat beside Rowan and sat down and arranged her hands in her lap and looked at the front of the room. Ashbury's counsel was a tall man named Fitch, who had the particular manner of a barrister who believes that a well-constructed question is its own answer. He examined Iris for 40 minutes. He pressed her on duress, on whether the circumstances of her father's debt had constituted pressure that a reasonable young woman of 19 could have resisted. He pressed her on the uninformed nature of her consent to Rowan, on whether a woman who did not know about Ashbury's prior contract could be said to have chosen freely. He built his case carefully, brick by brick, with the patience of a man who has done this many times. And then, in the 38th minute, he suggested to the court that a romantic young woman of 19 cannot be trusted to distinguish mature judgment from impulse. That what her grace believed to be a considered choice was more likely the natural susceptibility of a young mind in an unfamiliar situation, reaching toward the nearest available comfort. Iris requested the court's indulgence to speak at length. The judge looked at her over his papers. He granted it. She stood. She spoke without notes, because she had read the notes so many times that they were inside her now, part of her, and she did not need to look at them. She told the court what her mother had prepared her for. The 6 months of whispered instruction, the particular shape of the endurance she had been trained to perform. She named it plainly, without embarrassment, because embarrassment would have implied that the preparation was shameful, and it was not shameful. It was a mother's grief made practical, and she would not apologize for it. She told the court what Ashbury had already purchased, the specific terms of the contract, the price, the 3 installments. And she told them what she had understood on her wedding night, and what she had not understood, and what she had learned in the 7th week when her husband laid every document on the library table and let her read them herself. She told the court what her marriage to Rowan Castellane had prevented. She was specific. She named Ashbury's 3 previous wives and the manner of their deaths, which were a matter of record. And she described what the contract her father had signed would have meant for her life. And she said that she understood, now with full knowledge, having read every document in evidence, that her husband had spent 19 months and a considerable portion of his personal holdings ensuring that she would never become a 4th entry in that record. She said that she had chosen her husband. She said she had done so with full knowledge of her own history, which she had acquired in the 7th week of her marriage, and that the choice had been made again every day in the week since, and that she would make it again tomorrow and the day after that. She sat down. The gallery was very quiet. Rowan was 3 inches to her left, their shoulders not touching, and she was aware of every fraction of that distance. Under the bench, where no one above the level of the floor could see, she placed her right hand flat on his left thigh and held it there. She held it through closing arguments. She held it through the interval before the ruling, when the room breathed and shifted and the gallery murmured and subsided. When the ruling was delivered, Ashbury's bill dismissed with costs, the court taking the unusual step of commending her Grace's testimony. His hand found hers under the bench and squeezed once, hard, before they both rose separately to bow to the court. That night, in a private parlor at a posting inn outside London, a fire burning in the grate and supper waiting on the sideboard, Iris crossed to Rowan before he had removed his coat. She placed her right hand flat against the side of his jaw, the way he had once placed his thumb against her cheek, the same deliberateness, the same visible intention, and went up on her toes and kissed him. His arms came around her. One hand settled at the small of her back, and the other moved into her hair, and the first kiss lasted 3 seconds, and the second kiss lasted considerably longer. And when she finally drew back, her forehead rested against his chin, and she could feel him breathing. "I want to eat dinner first," she said. "I want to sit across a table from you for an hour and look at your face before anything else." "Then we will eat dinner," he said. They sat across from each other at the small table by the fire, and they ate, and they talked about Oakes, about the gallery, about the particular expression on Fitch's face when the ruling was delivered, which Rowan described with a precision that made Iris set down her fork and laugh properly, fully, the way she had not laughed since the stable yard. Rowan watched her laugh with an expression she could now name, because she had been watching his face for 7 months, and she knew all of his expressions. This one was the expression of a man who has been given something he did not dare to expect. 3 weeks after the Chancery hearing, Iris travelled alone to Penhallow Park in Devon. She found her mother in the drawing-room, Lady Sybil, 52, who had taught her daughter endurance with the precision and urgency of someone who had seen what happened when a young woman had none. Iris sat down across from her and told her everything. Ashbury, the fraudulent debt, the library, the Chancery chamber, and the 40 minutes under examination and the ruling delivered. Lady Sybil listened without speaking. She was very still. When Iris finished, her mother looked out the window for a long moment. Then she said, "I did not know about Ashbury. Your father never told me about Ashbury." "I know," Iris said. "I knew about the debt," Lady Sybil said. "I knew your father was ruined. I did not know how." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I had a sister. Her name was Frances. She died at 23. Iris looked at her mother. "Her husband," Lady Sybil said. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. "I was 16 when it happened. I watched what a violent man does to a young woman who has no preparation, no armor, no understanding of what is being asked of her." She looked at her hands. "When I married your father was not that kind of man. But I taught you as though every man might be. I taught you what I wished someone had taught Frances." Iris moved from her chair to her mother's side and knelt on the floor and took both her mother's hands in hers. "It was not doctrine," Iris said. "It was grief." "It was grief," Lady Sybil said. and it was never meant for this marriage. They stayed like that for some time, the fire burning low around them, while outside the Devon hills held the particular gray-green light of an afternoon in early spring. Lady Sybil came to Thornemere in April. Before she arrived, Iris wrote in her own hand the letter to her father. It was brief. It informed Sir Thomas Penhallow that Lady Sybil's visit to Thornemere was a private one, and that he was not included in the invitation. It said nothing about the fraudulent debt. It said nothing about Ashbury. It said only what it needed to say, in Iris's handwriting, sealed with Iris's seal, sent from Thornemere by Iris's decision and no one else's. In May, at sunrise, Iris and Rowan stood in the Thornemere chapel garden. The vicar was there, and the head gardener, who had been at Thornemere for 30 years and had, in that time, developed the quality of absolute discretion that long service to a house produces. Lady Sybil stood to Iris's left in her gray traveling coat, holding her gloves in both hands. The dew was still on the grass. The sun was coming over the chapel wall in long flat lines, the kind of early light that makes everything look as though it has just been decided. Iris said her vow first. She had written it herself, and she spoke it without paper, looking at Rowan's face. She said that she came to this vow with full knowledge of her own history and her own choice, and that she was a wife who knew she had not been sold, who had been instead found, by a man who had spent 3 years looking for the right way to undo a wrong he had not committed. She said that she took him now, not because the law had arranged it, but because she had chosen it, in the library in the 7th week, and every day since. Rowan's voice, when he spoke, was not entirely steady. He said that he had spent 3 years trying to find an honorable way to return what his grandfather had stolen, and that he had found instead something his grandfather could not have anticipated and had certainly not deserved to produce. A woman whose judgment he trusted completely, whose courage had stood in a London courtroom and won her own marriage in public, and whose hand, placed over his in the estate office on the afternoon Sir Thomas left, had been the most precise and generous act of grace he had ever been offered. He said that he intended to earn by good fortune what his grandfather had tried to take by theft, and that he expected it would take the rest of his life, and that he had no objection to that. The vicar pronounced the blessing. The gardener looked at his boots. Lady Sybil pressed her gloves between her palms. The sun came fully over the chapel wall. That night, the house was quiet in the particular way of a house whose inhabitants have come to rest. Iris stood at her nightstand and blew out the candle, her candle, on her nightstand, which she had placed there herself, and turned toward Rowan. "I have been ready for 3 weeks," she said. "I wanted to choose the night myself." "I know," he said. She crossed to him. She placed her palm flat against his chest, feeling the warmth of him through the linen, the slow steadiness of his breathing. Then she raised her hand to the side of his face, her palm against his jaw, her thumb at the corner of his mouth, and said his name once. "Rowan." He brought his hand up to cover hers, the way she had once covered his at the desk, palm to palm, and held it there against his face. The fire in the grate burned low and threw its light in long moving shapes across the ceiling. She had been told 6 months ago that she would cry on her wedding night, that she must not, but that she would, that there would be something to endure, and that endurance was what was required of her, and that if she was very composed, she might manage it without weeping. This was not her wedding night. It was a Tuesday in May, arrived at by 7 months of careful watching, of a thumb at her cheek and hands at her waist and a library table covered in documents and 40 minutes under examination in a packed chancery chamber. It had been chosen entirely by her on her own terms, in her own time, in a house that had arranged itself quietly around her since the morning after the wedding, when Mrs. Halston had moved a razor without being asked. She did not cry. Somewhere in the house, a window was open to the May night, and through it, faint and clear, came the sound of a housemaid beginning to sing.